A village in the northern highlands sat buried under ice. The date was late February 1955, and the thermometer had just dropped to -25 degrees.
Children are on their way to school, to become familiar with words and figures, to learn something of the best thought of the world outside, and above all, to bring home what they have learned and to use it in their daily lives.
Nobody in Thorndale had seen anything like it in 60 years. This single moment would go down in history as the coldest temperature recorded anywhere in the region since 1895. But this wasn't an isolated incident. The entire nation was suffering. What started as a simple cold spell in early January had turned into something far worse. Two separate waves of freezing weather hit the country, one right after the other, and people were starting to wonder if it would ever end. Let's go back to where it all began. The first week of January brought heavy snowfall that caught everyone off guard. The capital city woke up to find itself under 15 centimeters of snow, the worst anyone had seen there since 1947. Most people expected things to clear up quickly. They didn't. The freeze continued without mercy until the end of January. Then, just when it seemed like the worst was over, February arrived and brought even harsher conditions. Snow buried the northern regions under depths of 2 feet or more. Near the town of Riverside, measurements showed 3 feet of accumulation. Remote areas and island communities faced drifts that reached 30 feet high, completely swallowing houses and cutting off entire settlements from the outside world. Military forces had to step in. They launched a rescue operation, using aircraft to drop food and essential supplies to people who had been stranded for days. Families who had always felt connected to civilization suddenly found themselves completely alone, staring through frosted windows at a landscape they couldn't access. Even southern areas weren't spared. Towns that rarely saw serious winter weather recorded 2 feet of level snow. Transportation systems collapsed. Train tracks froze solid. Roads disappeared completely under white blankets. The entire country, still trying to recover from war damage, now had to fight against nature itself. The same day that Thorndale set its temperature record, the southwestern coastal region experienced 16 straight hours of snowfall. This was an area where frost was unusual in most years. Suddenly it looked like the far north. Winter had decided that no corner of the nation would escape. Inside homes, daily life became a constant battle. Central heating didn't exist in most houses back then. A single coal fire in one room was all families had. Everyone crowded into that space, trying to stay warm while the rest of the building turned freezing cold. You could see your breath in the bedrooms. Ice crystals formed on the inside of windows, creating patterns so thick you couldn't see through the glass. Coal was the difference between warmth and freezing to death. But the extreme weather made deliveries impossible. Transport vehicles couldn't move through the snow. Coal supplies sat frozen at storage facilities while desperate families burned whatever they could find. Old newspapers went into the fire. Broken pieces of furniture. Anything combustible. Every street smelled of coal smoke, a constant reminder that keeping the fire going meant survival. Women thawed frozen milk bottles by placing them in pots of hot water. Children had to scrape ice from bedroom windows just to let in some light. Men bundled up in every piece of clothing they owned and went outside to clear pathways that would be filled with snow again by nighttime. There were no easy fixes. You just had to push through it. The weather pattern was especially cruel. January's cold spell finally broke, giving people hope. Then February returned with even worse conditions. Farmers stood helpless as the frozen ground made harvesting impossible. Root vegetables remained locked underground, frozen as hard as rock. In several locations, people had to bring in heavy equipment just to extract potatoes from the earth. The frost destroyed massive amounts of crops. Food that should have fed communities rotted in place. For elderly people and those already in poor health, the winter became life-threatening. Hypothermia was a genuine risk. Medical professionals made house visits through waist-deep snow, carrying half-frozen equipment, desperately trying to reach patients who had no way of coming to them. Hospitals overflowed with people suffering from cold exposure. Pneumonia spread through populations already weakened by years of post-war difficulties. Despite everything, the nation kept functioning. That was simply the expectation. You didn't complain. You didn't sit around waiting for someone else to solve your problems. You handled it. On the 16th of January, something bizarre happened in the capital. At 1:15 in the afternoon, daylight disappeared. Pollution from coal fires combined with cold air to create a layer of smog stretching 4,000 feet thick. Light levels fell to 1,000th of normal brightness. People called emergency services in genuine panic, believing something catastrophic was happening. It took several hours for the darkness to fade, a terrifying reminder of just how extreme the situation had become. Roads became impossible to use. Cars vanished under snow. Bus services stopped running. If you needed to go somewhere, you walked. Miles through drifts. Through wind that felt like it was cutting your skin. Just to reach a store that might not even be open. The determination people showed was incredible. Mail carriers still completed their routes, pushing through knee-deep snow, because postal delivery was expected to continue no matter what. Tradition, stubbornness, and pride all mixed together. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough regarding that winter. It wasn't just about making it through each day. It was about how people treated each other. When the cold became too much to bear alone, neighbors who had barely exchanged greetings before started knocking on doors. They shared coal supplies, spare blankets, and whatever food they had extra. Complete strangers helped push stuck vehicles out of snowbanks. Families opened their doors to people who had lost their heat sources. Church halls and community buildings became gathering places where people came not just to warm up, but to be around others. You'd find yourself sitting next to folks you'd never met before, trading stories, playing card games, drinking tea that somehow tasted better because someone else had prepared it. The freezing temperatures broke down the usual reserved nature people had. When everyone's dealing with the same hardship, being too proud becomes something you can't really afford. There was humor too, surprisingly. The kind of dark jokes only people in tough situations could come up with. Jokes about Arctic birds showing up in city squares, about snowmen needing official ration documents. The national radio broadcaster, staying calm as always, reported the conditions with typical restraint. Significant snowfall has impacted most regions. Those traveling should exercise caution. No hysteria, no dramatic warnings. Just calm acknowledgement that yes, conditions were terrible, but people would cope. Children, naturally, thought the whole thing was amazing. When schools shut down, which happened frequently, the frozen landscape became their playground. Makeshift sleds built from tea trays and baking sheets flew down every slope in sight. Snowball battles went on all day long. Kids returned home completely soaked, frozen solid, and smiling from ear to ear. Parents worried about getting the laundry dry, not about safety equipment. Wool socks dried by the fireplace, gloves stiffened with ice. The next morning, they'd head right back out, constructing snowmen that towered over grown adults. Ask anyone who was young during that winter, and they'll describe it as magical, the greatest winter they ever experienced. Because when you're a child, snow isn't a problem to solve. It's pure freedom. The cold weather finally started easing up around mid-March 1955. Roads became visible again. Water began dripping from rooftops. The first delivery trucks managed to get through, and people greeted them like returning heroes. The nation, exhausted, covered in frostbite and soot, started to recover. When milk bottles arrived without being frozen for the first time in weeks, people actually applauded. Postal delivery got back to normal. Pipes burst one final time as the thaw continued. Gradually, life moved back toward something resembling normal. But the damage lingered. Farms had lost animals, entire harvests, and income. Businesses had been forced to close for weeks at a time. The winter had cost the country enormously, not just financially, but in terms of what it did to people's physical health and mental well-being. Yet there was also an odd sense of pride, a feeling that everyone had been put to the test and hadn't collapsed. That winter taught the nation an important lesson, though it wasn't really about weather patterns. It was about the ability to keep going when things get difficult. When everything froze over, when supplies ran out, when it felt like the freezing temperatures would continue forever, people refused to quit. They took care of one another. They kept their fires burning. They made it through as a community. There were no mobile phones to check weather predictions. No central heating systems to rely on. No delivery applications to bring groceries to your doorstep. Just neighbors, community connections, and a stubborn refusal to be defeated by a few months of ice and snow. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't easy. But it was something nobody would forget. Because the winter that almost froze the entire nation solid also showed everyone what truly mattered. Not heat coming from a radiator, but the warmth that comes from other people. Not physical comfort, but inner strength. Not surviving on your own, but making it through together. The frost of that year is still discussed today. Not only because of the record-breaking low temperatures or the snow that swallowed villages whole, but because of what it showed about people. That a nation, beaten down by war and struggling to rebuild itself, still had something at its core that couldn't be broken. A quiet determination that no amount of ice could ever freeze solid. The extreme weather revealed something important about human nature. When pushed to the limits, when facing conditions that seemed impossible to endure, people didn't turn inward and give up. They reached out. They shared what little they had. They checked on the vulnerable. They kept moving forward even when every step was difficult. That winter became more than just a weather event. It became a story about what happens when a community decides to face hardship together instead of alone. The physical cold was brutal, there's no denying that. But what people remember most isn't the temperature readings or the snow depths. They remember the moments of connection. The shared struggles. The small acts of kindness that made unbearable days slightly more bearable. Years later, survivors would tell their children and grandchildren about those months. They'd describe the ice on the windows, the endless snow, the bone-deep cold that never seemed to leave. But they'd also talk about the neighbor who shared their last bit of coal. The stranger who helped dig out their pathway. The community gathering where everyone brought whatever they could spare to make a shared meal. The winter of 1955 to 1956 stands as a testament to resilience. Not the resilience of one person, but of an entire nation choosing to support each other when giving up would have been easier. Were you there during those frozen months? Do you have memories of the snow, the bitter cold, or the way communities came together? Share your experiences in the comments below.